So I follow quite a few YouTubers, and one thing a lot of these YouTubers have in common is that they start small businesses, and they often share their business problems out to their audience. And as a member of that audience, whenever I hear them talking about their problems, I can't help but think about my corporate experience and how they could use business intelligence or additional data to help solve them. So, this is going to be a new video series that I'm making. It might be one video or it might be two about how I would use uh, increased visibility to data to help these famous YouTubers solve their problems. Now, the first of those YouTubers who I think could really benefit from some increased visibility to their data is a guy by the name of Christian Guzman. He runs a very large apparel company called Athlete Athletics. And he's constantly talking about how he has trouble with inventory management. Now, I happen to have a fair amount of experience working for very large apparel companies. If you haven't checked out my LinkedIn, it's down in the video description. But long story short, I worked for Nike for about 3 years in their finance department, and then I worked for Adidas for about 3 years in their wholesale department. What that means is that I understand the metrics and the KPIs in this business pretty well. So, I think that he could really benefit from 3 dashboards. So his first dashboard needs to be kind of like a summary metric dashboard that he manages his business on. I would suggest probably revenue, margin, and sellout, which we will cover what those are. And then the next 2 dashboards would be a inventory management dashboard, which shows the amount of product he has on hand and then the amount of product that's inbound across different POs. Typically, it's coming over from China, so you're going to have kind of POs arriving for at different times. And then the third dashboard that I would probably recommend is an individual product scorecard health dashboard, which is where you could, select a piece of clothing and it would show you all the KPIs on that product one by one. So if you get into a meeting or a discussion with designers and you want to talk about the product economics of apparel, you'd be able to quickly pull up that piece and get all of the stats listed out. So this is going to be a 3-part series. I'm going to build a dashboard in each one of these series. The first dashboard that we're starting today is going to be kind of that scorecard on those 3 core metrics. So let's jump into Power BI and let's start building. But first, before we do that, let's take a look at the final dashboard that we're going to end up building this video. So it's going to allow us to see revenue, the sellout percentage of the product, the gross margin, the rankings of all of our individual product lines across those metrics, and then break all those out by both a week to date, month to date, and year to date timeline. And all of this, if this was in a corporate environment, would refresh automatically, daily, hourly. You could even have it be in real time depending on the quality of your data. So now let's jump in to how we're going to build this. And I think we might not be starting in Power BI. Okay, I lied. We're not going into Power BI. We're going into PowerPoint and we're going to wireframe what we want this dashboard to look like. So first things first, what we're going to do is we're going to have a header with the company logo. Then the next thing that we're going to have is we're going to have a slicer that's going to allow you to select between year-to-date, periodic, weekly, or quarterly or daily metrics up here at the top. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 card visuals, one for each of the metrics I mentioned before. So we're going to have a card visual on revenue, we're going to have a card visual on gross margin, and then we're going to have a card visual on sellout percent. And then we're going to have kind of, and in the apparel business, you would typically have kind of product families, and then below those product families, you're going to have SKUs. So you're going to have like a legging line, for example, and then every single different color or size of that legging line is going to be a different SKU. So what we're going to do is we're going to have kind of our top 10 family leaders, like product family leaders, and then our top 10 product family losers down here at the bottom for each one of these metrics. So we're going to have kind of a KPI card here, right? And then we're going to have kind of a KPI card here for each of and every single one of these. So this is going to be kind of the general feel of this dashboard. It's a 1-page thing. It's something that you can look at and you can understand really quickly. This isn't meant to allow you to really drill deep into your metrics, but it's meant for someone like a CEO or the owner of a company to be able to glance at first thing in the morning and just say, hey, is this something I need to go chase down with my team? And that way they can get ahead of problems early on. So with this, in order to power this, we're probably going to need a couple of different data sets. So Power BI really loves star schemas, but in this case, you're probably going to have kind of three data sets. So the first data set that you're going to have is going to be your sales data, right? So that's going to be coming out of your Shopify or your ERP if you're kind of wholesaling. The second data set that you're going to have is going to be your actual like wholesale, like distribution center data. So this is going to be your like how much inventory or product you have on hand. And then in the distribution center. And then the third data set is going to be kind of your inbound POs. And there's actually some really cool companies that allow you to track inbound POs. For example, one that's really cool is Project 44. Just side note. And so he's really probably dealing with three different fact tables. And then he's also going to have a couple of different dimension tables. So he's going to have a product master table. And so this is going to have info on kind of the different family lines and products. And then he's going to have probably a day or a fiscal calendar, right? So he's going to have a fiscal calendar over here. Now, it's going to be really hard to actually produce individual star schemas for this data. There's kind of three different approaches that you can take. So the first approach is that you try to blend all of this data into one single fact table. There's two different ways to do that. One, you have a really wide table. So you basically have one table with a bunch of columns. And a program like Tableau would really love that. The other way that you can do it is you can create a very narrow table, so you can stack the data and then kind of have indicator columns on this. Or you can do what I'm probably going to do in this video, which is I'm going to leave them as separate tables, and then each one is essentially going to be kind of an individual star schema. So the individual fact tables won't have relationships between each other, but they will kind of exist right here. And we will have arrows kind of going like this in the database. So I didn't make you watch me create arrows, but essentially each and every single one of these on their own is a star schema, right? So you have a sales fact in 2 dimensions, you have an inbound PO and then 2 dimensions, and then you have a wholesale distribution data in 2 dimensions. So it doesn't look like a star schema, but from a Power BI perspective, it kind of is. So the next thing we need to talk about are kind of the KPIs and how we're going to define them. Now, I obviously don't have access to the data or to Alpha data, but here is kind of the columns that I would produce in these fact tables. So I would have a date table with a date ID, date, fiscal week, fiscal period, fiscal year. In my product table, I'd have a product ID, a season, a product family name, a product name, the main color, the gender of the product, the admin or design cost of the product, the customer shipping cost, the cost it takes to ship that product to the customer, the list price of the product. On the sales table, I would have the date of the sale, the sales PO, the product that was sold, the quantity that was sold, and then the discount that was given to the customer off of that list for each product. On the inbound fact table, I would have kind of all of our POs in a single table. I would have the container number of that PO if it was shipped, the location, so basically if it's where it's going, so what warehouse or where it's at, the status of the order, if it's at the factory, inbound or delivered, the ETA, so if it's still inbound. I would have the quantity, the cost per unit, and the freight charge. I would also probably have a delivered date in here actually, so I'm going to go through and I'm going to add that. And then kind of moving down to the warehouse table, we're going to have a product ID, we're going to have our total quantity on hand, and then I am going to have essentially our average storage charge per unit in that warehouse fact table, and then our average handling charge per unit also in that warehouse fact table. So this would be the date product was delivered. Going then into our metrics or kind of our core KPIs, our revenue is then going to be defined as our total sold quantity, and then essentially would take the list price out of the product, and we would subtract out our discount that we sold and multiply that by our quantity. Our cost of goods sold is going to be essentially our per unit flat cost. So that would be our admin or design cost plus our customer shipping cost per unit plus our average storage charge per unit plus our average handling charge per unit plus then across kind of all of our POs, our average cost per unit and then our average freight per unit. Then what we're going to kind of have is we're going to then have our profit, which is our revenue minus our cost of goods sold, and then our gross margin, which is going to be one of our core metrics. So revenue is going to be a core metric, and then gross margin and sellout is going to be a core metric, is going to be profit divided by revenue. And then we're going to have sellout, and sellout is essentially our total order quantity. So if our inbound fact table has all of our POs for all time in it, it's going to have that divided by our sales fact quantity. So let me go make some fake data and I'll be right back with it loaded into Power BI. All right, so creating all that fake data actually took a lot of time because I was trying to make the data kind of realistic. I didn't super succeed, but as you can see, here we are. We have all of our fact tables in. We have our product primary data table, and then we have our date table over here. I created a few different metrics. So first, let's look at revenue. So our revenue is going to be our sales quantity times our list price times essentially the amount in our sales dashboard we took off from that list price per sales order, right? So if you had a 10% discount on that order, it would multiply that 10% times list count times quantity, which then allows me to get to an actual revenue number. Then we're going to have our cost of goods sold. Right here, you're actually seeing a little bit of an error come through, and I need to actually quickly adjust that. But as you can see, you're going to have we're going to have our product table. We're going to pull our admin costs. We're going to pull our customer cost, and then we're going to pull our average charge per unit out of the warehouse table, and then we're going to pull our average handling charge per unit. Next, out of the inbound table, we're then going to calculate our cost per unit, essentially out of that factory PO, and we're going to average our cost per unit across all of the factory POs, and then we're going to do the exact same with our freight charge. Only on the PO, typically you have one big freight charge, so we're going to be dividing that freight charge by the quantity on the PO and then kind of taking our average charge. This then gives us essentially a average cost of goods sold per product, which then we can multiply by the quantity sold to get our total COGS. Finally, for gross margin, we basically just take revenue minus COGS and divide it by revenue. So we now have a gross margin that can calculate per product. Sellout is pretty simple. It's just total quantity sold divided by total quantity ordered. And that gets us to this point in the dashboard where we have essentially all of our product names, we have revenue, we have COGS, we have our gross margin, we have their sellout percentage, we have their total quantity sold, and their total quantity ordered. Realistically, for an e-commerce business, I would expect this sellout percentage is much higher in actuality for Alphalete, and this gross margin is probably in the green. Christian has talked about struggling with gross margin management, though, so who knows? Maybe he is losing money. I certainly would hope not, however. So kind of realistic data, but at least you can see right here how it is built. So now we get to do the fun stuff. Now we get to design our dashboard. First things first, we are going to need our layout. So I'm going to use the Figma backgrounds that I created in my other video. And then I'm going to set the background here. So I'm going to expand the formatting pane, go into canvas background. I'm going to go into browse, and then I am going to go into my downloads, and I'm going to go into my Power BI projects in here. And I am going to set to my background number 2 here. And I'm going to go fit, My transparency is going to be at 0%. And look, just like that, we have a background. The next thing that I then am going to go do is I'm going to insert in essentially my new card visual. So my card visual right here. My first one is going to be on revenue. So that's going to be my data right here. And if you can see, I can expand this. Then my next one is going to be on, and actually I use background number 2, but I actually want to use background number 3. So I'm going to go back here. And then here we are. We're going to start configuring our revenue. And then I am going to configure over here our sellout percentage there. Well, actually, let's go back, and we'll go revenue, then we'll go sellout percentage, and then we will go gross margin right here. And we'll have these all nice and lined out. And just like that, we have the first of our visuals. Okay, the next thing that we're going to need to do before we get into any kind of prettyfying of this is we're going to need to create our ranking tables. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to rank all of the products by essentially revenue, sellout, and then gross margin. So let's get started on that. So we're going to need to create a DAX measure. I just went and did that behind the scenes. What we're going to do is we're going to use a rank X, and we're going to take all of the rows in our product table. We're going to rank them by revenue, and we're going to go descending, and we're going to do a dense rank. That then gives us product rank by revenue. I can then go ahead and I can insert in a table. In that table, I can then bring in the product name, and then over here, I can then bring in our ranking. If I then sort by our ranking right here, there you have it descending. Here you have it ascending by revenue. And you're probably going to want to know the actual revenue value. So let's bring that over. Here it is by revenue. So this is now our first table. We don't need this much space for product rank by revenue. So we'll bring this over and we'll duplicate that. And we'll drag this all the way down. All right, we're now going to essentially make 3 more of these, right? Because the ranking could be different. And just like that, with some editing magic, I now have measures for every single one of my 3 metrics, and then I have a corresponding table. The next piece of this that we need to create is the dropdown that's going to allow us to switch from year to date, week to date, and month to date. So I did this via a calculation group. So if we go into model view, you can see I have some DAX here, and I'm using time intelligence as well, as well as my date table. So here I am going year to date, using the dates year to date, week to date, filtering on the year, and then using my week num, and then month to date here, doing pretty much the same thing. And then prior month to date, prior week to date, and then prior year to date using the parallel period feature. So I can then go ahead and I can then insert in a new slicer, and that new slicer can contain my calculation group items, and I can go ahead and I can remove this. So I can select all and I can remove the ones I don't want, and I'll click that I mark and I'll close that. And then I'll turn my slicer on to single select on. And then as you can see here, we can switch between month to date, week to date, and year to date. All right, so we now have the basic plumbing of our dashboard built. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean it up and I'm going to make it pretty. So be right back while I go ahead and I do that. And just like that, we have a finished dashboard. As you can see, you can flip between year to date, month to date, and week to date, and everything works and it filters out. So how can you use these metrics and these core KPIs to improve your business? Well, revenue, I think, is pretty straightforward. You can identify the products that are generating the most revenue from your business. But what you can then do is you can also generate the speed at which you're kind of selling through your inventory and making sure you don't have aging inventory with your sellout metric, and then the profitability of that revenue with your gross margin metric. So in this case, right, the Blaze joggers are generating week to date, the most revenue as well as the most gross margin. Unfortunately, my fake data is making the numbers look a little wonky, but something like this would be very useful if you had the actual data in a business setting. So I hope you enjoyed this style of video. It's a little bit different where I'm not just being design focused, but also kind of trying to take in business context and stakeholder needs. If you liked it, please consider subscribing. And if you want to learn a little bit more about me, feel free to check out my LinkedIn down below. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.